What's up, YouTube? Before I get into the video, let me remind you that if you like my content, please hit that like and subscribe button, and if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Okay, so we are going to be taking a look at a deck tech with Belbe, Corrupted Overseer. Part of the reason that I built this deck was because I just happen to have the black-green land suite sitting in my box, and I also just happen to have this version of Belbe laying around, and I wanted to see what it would be like. So let's take a look. Belbe Corrupted Overseer is 1 black, 1 green for a 2/2. At the beginning of each player's post-combat main phase, each player adds 2 colorless for each of my opponents who lost life this turn. So it's really important that you understand that it says each of my opponents. So if I am playing Belbe, my opponents are, if we're playing a 4-player game, the 3 other people at the table. So if it is one of my opponent's turns, my opponents still include them. And so when your opponents are getting mana from this card, they can only get mana from dealing damage to either of the other 2 opponents that they share with you, or finding a way to deal damage to themselves. That's a very important part about this card. So we're going to take a look in here. The whole idea here is to take advantage of the extra mana that you get from Belbe early on. So we'll start with the creatures. Alright, we're gonna start with the Apex Devastator. This is 8 and 2 green for a 2/2. It has Cascade, 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 Cascade. I think I did say it was a 10/10, right? Not a 2/2, it's a 10/10. Okay, moving on. We got Archfiend of Despair for 6 and 2 black. It's a 6/6 with flying. Your opponents can't gain life, and at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the amount of life they lost that turn. We got Archon of Cruelty for 6 and 2 black. It's a 6/6 with flying. When Archon of Cruelty enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. We got Iara, First of Locktwain. This is 3 black for a 2/3. When Iara, First of Locktwain, or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. You can tap and sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. We got Beledros Witherbloom for 5, a black and a green. It's a 4/4 with flying. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token. When this creature dies, you gain a life. You can pay 10 life to untap all lands you control. You can only activate that once per turn. We got Cauldron Familiar for 1 black. It's a 1/1. When Cauldron Familiar enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. You can sacrifice a food to return Cauldron Familiar from the graveyard to your battlefield. We got Creeping Bloodsucker for 1 and a black. It's a 1/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each opponent. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. We got Deathrite Shaman for 1 hybrid black-green. It's a 1/2. You can tap it to exile target land card from a graveyard and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You can tap 1 black and it to exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard and each opponent loses 2 life. Or you can tap 1 green and it to exile target creature card from a graveyard and you gain 2 life. We've got Defiant Bloodlord for 5 and 2 black. It's a 4/5 with flying. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. We've got Dina Soul Steeper for black and a green. It's a 1/3. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. You can pay 1 and sacrifice another creature, and Dina Soul Steeper gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. We've got Epicure of Blood for 4 and a black. It's a 4/4. When you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. We've got Grey Merchant for 3 and 2 black. It's a 2/4. When Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the amount of life lost this way. Got Hooded Blightfang for 2 and a black. It's a 1/4 with Death Touch. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. Got Llanowar Elves for 1 green. It's a 1/1. You can tap it for green. We got Loyal Subordinate for 2 and a black. It's a 3/1 with Menace. Has Lieutenant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, each opponent loses 3 life. We've got Marauding Blight Priest for 2 and a black. It's a 3/2. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. We've got Mardush Shadow Spear, it's 1 black for a 1/1. Whenever Mardu Shadow Spear attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. It has dash for 1 and a black. We've got Night Market Lookout for 1 black. It's a 1/1. Whenever Night Market Lookout becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. We've got Pontiff of Blight for 4 and 2 black. It's 2/7 with Extort. Other creatures you control have Extort. We got Psychosis Crawler. It is 5 for a star. Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. We got Pulse Tracker for 1 black. It's a 1/1. When Pulse Tracker attacks, each opponent loses a life. We got Steel Hellkite for 6 to 5/5 with flying. You can pay 2 to give Steel Hellkite +1/+0 until end of turn. You can also pay X to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. We got Twilight Prophet for 2 and 2 black. It's a 2/4 with flying and ascend. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have City's Blessing, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the card's mana value. We've got Vampire Neonate for 1 black. It's a 0/3. You can pay 2 and tap it, and each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. We got Vicious Conquistador for 1 black. It's a 1/2. Whenever Vicious Conquistador attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. We've got Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. For 2 and a black, it's a 1/3. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses that much life. And for 3 and 2 black, creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. Sorry, it's not each opponent, it's target opponent. Target opponent loses that much life. We got Wandering Archaic for 5. It's a 4/4. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 2, or they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy the spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Also has a flip side to it. Explore the Vastlands. Each player looks at the top 5 cards of their library, reveals a land card from among them. A land card and or an instant or sorcery card from among them, and puts the revealed cards into their hand and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Each player gains 3 life. We got Witherbloom Apprentice for 1 black, 1 green. It's a 2/2. It has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. And we have Zulaport Cutthroat for 1 and a black. It's a 1/1. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. Next up, we're going to take a look at instants. Starting with Abrupt Decay for 1 black and 1 green. This spell can't be countered. Destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. We got Assassin's Trophy for 1 black and 1 green. Destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Just put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. We got Crushing Disappointment. Each player loses 2 life. You draw 2 cards. Got Hagra Mauling. 2 and 2 black. This spell costs 1 less to cast. If an opponent controls no basic lands, destroy target creature. The flip side is a land that comes into play tapped. We got Infernal Grasp. For 1 and a black, destroy target creature. You lose 2 life. We got Mortality Spear. For 2, a black and a green. This spell costs 2 less if you cast 2 less to cast if you gained life this turn. Destroy target non-land permanent. We got Putrefy. For 1, a black and a green. Destroy target artifact or creature. It can't be regenerated. And then finally, we got Tamiyo's Safekeeping for 1 green. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You gain 2 life. Next up is Sorceries. Starting with Cultivate. 2 and a green. Search your library for 2 basic lands. Put 1 into play, 1 into play tapped, 1 into your hand, then shuffle. We got Damnable Pact. Costs X and 2 black. Target player draws X cards and loses X life. We got Death Cloud. X and 3 black. Each player loses X life, then discards X cards from his or her hand, then sacrifices X creatures, then sacrifices X lands. We got Exsanguinate. For X and 2 black, each opponent loses X life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. We got Feed the Swarm for 1 and a black. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. Lose life equal to the permanent's mana value. We got Ingaruk's Wake for 7 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Got Kodama's Reach for 2 and a green. Search your library for 2 basic land cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and 1 into your hand, then shuffle. We got Nature's Lore for 1 and a green. Search your library for a forced card. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Got Rampant Growth for 1 and a green. Search your library for a basic land. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. We got Sign in Blood for 2 black. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. We got Vicious Rumors for 1 black. Vicious Rumors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, then puts the top card of their library into their graveyard, and then you gain life. Next up is Artifacts. Starting with Bolas Citadel. 3 and 3 black. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library you may play the top card of your library. And then if you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost, rather than pay its mana cost. You can also tap this and sacrifice 10 permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. Got Bantu's Monument for 3. Black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. We got Cryptolith Fragment for 3. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add mana of any color to your mana pool, and each player loses 1 life. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if each player has 10 or less life, transform Cryptolith Fragment. Transforms into Aurora of Emrakul, which is 1/4 with Flying Death Touch, and when Aurora of Emrakul attacks, each opponent loses 3 life. Next up, we have Godpharaoh's Statue. For 6, spells your opponents cast cost 2 more to cast. And at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. We got Golgari Signet for 2. You can pay 1 and tap it to add green and black. We got Horizon Stone for 5. If you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. We have Soul Ring. It costs 1. You can tap it for 2. Got Talisman of Resilience. It costs 2. You can tap it to add colorless, or you can tap it to add black or green, as long as you have it deal 1 damage to you. And we got Whip of Erebos for 2 and 2 black. Creatures you control have lifelink, and for 2 and 2 black, you can tap it to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it in anywhere else, and then activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Next up, we have Enchantments. Starting with Bastion of Remembrance. This is 2 and a black. When Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. We have Court of Ambition for 2 and 2 black. When Court of Ambition enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. If you are the monarch, instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. We got Ill-Gotten Inheritance. 3 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, Ill-Gotten Inheritance deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. For 5 and a black, you can sacrifice Ill-Gotten Inheritance, and it deals 4 damage to target opponent, and you gain 4 life. Got Moldervine Reclamation for 3, a black and a green. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Got Palace Siege for 3 and 2 black. As Palace Siege enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. If you choose Khans at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If you chose Dragons at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Got Retreat to Hagra for 2 and a black. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose one. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. Got Sanctum of Stonefangs for 1 and a black. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of shrines you control. Got Sanguine Bond for 3 and 2 black. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. got Subversion for 3 and 2 black. During your upkeep, each of your opponents loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life for each 1 life lost this way. And then we got Wound Reflection for 5 and a black. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. Next up is NonBased Lions. We got Blooming Marsh. Is a check land. No, sorry, this is a fast land for for black and green. We got Command Tower, taps for your color identity. We've got Darkboar Pathway, which is the MDFC for black-green. We've got Exotic Orchard, which taps for any color your opponent's lands tap for. We got Golgari Rot Farm, which is the bounce land for black-green. Haunted Mire, which is a tap land for black-green that has land types. We got Leech Ridden Swamp. It comes into play tapped. You can tap a black and it to have each opponent lose 1 life, and you can only use that ability if you control 2 or more black permanents. It also has a land type. We've got Llanowar Wastes, which is a pain land for black-green. We got Necroblossom Snarl, which is a check land for... No, sorry, it's a reveal land for black-green. We got Nurturing Peatland, which is another pain land for black-green that you can sacrifice to draw cards. We've got Overgrown Tomb, which is a shock land for black-green that has land types. We've got Tainted Wood. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it for black-green, but only if you control a swamp. We've got Temple of Malady, which is a scry land for black-green. We've got Undergrowth Stadium, which is a crowd land for black-green. We got Verdant Catacombs, the fetch land for black-green. And we got Woodland Cemetery, another check land for black-green. Then we got our basics. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4 forests. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 swamps. So that is the Belbe Corrupted Overseer deck. The whole point here is to utilize a bunch of the different cards in here, like Vicious Conquistador, Bastion of Remembrance, Psychosis Crawler, Vampire Neonate, stuff like that, to deal damage to each of your opponents, even if it's small amounts, so that on your post-combat main phase you have the full 6 mana that you can get from it, and then you can cast big things like the Apex Devastator. If you start with an Apex Devastator in your hand and you also happen to have at least one thing that deals 1 damage to each of your opponents, you can get Apex Devastator, I believe, turn 4. Maybe sooner if you have more rocks, which makes this deck really ridiculous. We have God Pharaoh's Statue in here as well. It is a Staxy piece, but it also, every upkeep, at the end of every turn, at the end of each of your turns, it deals damage to everybody, so it's another way. Yeah, beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. So it's another way to slowly drain your opponents. If you don't have anything to do with that mana, you have the Horizon Stone to store it on, so that you can dump it into an X spell like Damnable Pact, Death Cloud, or Exsanguinate. Yeah, and you could also, as I wouldn't say honorable mention, but as another card that you can run in here, you could run Torment of Hailfire. I didn't have an extra copy, so I ran Death Cloud instead. Ultimately, the Exsanguinate and Death Cloud, and even to some degree the Damnable Pact, are supposed to be finishers, so that you can pretty much shut out either one of your opponents or all of your opponents. This deck can become a target pretty quickly. Most people, when they see Belbe, kind of want her dead after they've gotten their value from her. But it's still a pretty fun deck, and it's Golgari colors. So, yeah, Belbe Corrupted Overseer. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Keep it positive. I'll remove negative comments. And until next time, guys, peace.